Whoa, that was a close call.
Hey, psst. Psst. Hey, you. You can't see me, right? Good. The camouflage is working. Anyways, I can't even remember why I was trying to hide in that plant. But it reminds me of a true story in the Bible. There was a time when some mean people were trying to hide from Paul so they could ambush him and kill him. Whew. Now, like I said, they were not very nice people. You guys remember Paul, right? Paul was also called Saul. And at first, he did not approve of people who were Christ followers. In fact, he made it his mission to put in prison, and sometimes even kill, anyone who followed Jesus. That is until one day when he met Jesus in a bright light on the road to Damascus. He had a conversation with Jesus right there and became blind. A few days later, Saul was healed of his blindness and got baptized. His life was changed as he chose to follow Jesus. He became a missionary for Jesus by going and telling others about God and writing letters to members of the early church to help them grow in their faith and learn how to follow Jesus with their whole lives. Now, several of those letters that he wrote are now part of the Bible. Paul wasn't perfect, but he dedicated his life to sharing God with other people. He even went through a lot of crazy close calls, but God was with him the entire time. Check out one of those moments.
This true story from the Bible begins with Paul, a follower of Jesus, making his way to Jerusalem. When he got there, he went to the temple and some men accused him of telling others to disobey the Jewish laws. That caused a mob of people to get angry with Paul. They grabbed him and dragged him out of the temple and even tried to kill him. When a commander in the Roman army heard about this, he and some soldiers went to the scene. When the people saw them coming, they stopped beating Paul. The Roman commander arrested Paul and talked to the people who were accusing Paul to try and figure out what the problem was. But he couldn't figure out the truth with all the noise and confusion. So he had Paul taken to the fortress. There, the Roman commander ordered Paul to be whipped in order to get him to confess the crime the people said he was guilty of. But before they could hurt him, Paul said, "Is it legal for you to whip a Roman citizen who hasn't even been tried?" They had no idea that Paul was a Roman citizen. They decided not to whip and question Paul for fear of getting in trouble for harming one of their own people. The thing is, the Roman commander still needed to figure out what to do about Paul. So he had Paul brought before the priests and Jewish high council. The people there argued violently about what to do with Paul. Fearing for Paul's safety, the Roman commander had Paul taken away to the fortress once again. While Paul was there, a group of Jews got together and made an oath, or a promise, that they would not eat or drink until they had killed Paul. They went to the Jewish council and tried to set up a trap where Paul would be brought back to answer more questions, and they would kill him while he was on the way there. It would be an ambush. But Paul's nephew, the son of his sister, overheard the people talking about their plans to kill his uncle, and so he went to the fortress to tell Paul. Paul told his nephew to go tell the Roman commander, which he did. The Roman commander gathered together a bunch of soldiers to safely take Paul to the governor to stand trial. It was a close call, but Paul was safe. God had used Paul's nephew to help Paul escape the ambush and continue on to do the work of God.
Wow! That true story of Paul was a crazy close call. There were quite a few people who wanted Paul dead, and some of them even gathered to put together a plan to ambush him. But God's plan for Paul was not for him to die at the hands of an angry mob that day. From this true story, we can discover that God can use us to help others. Say that with me. God can use us to help others. Now, we don't know much about Paul's nephew, but we do know how God used him to help Paul. Let's take a look at the situation. The next morning, a group of Jews got together and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 of them in the conspiracy. They went to the leading priests and elders and told them, "We have bound ourselves with an oath to eat nothing until we have killed Paul. So you and the high council should ask the commander to bring Paul back to the council again. Pretend you want to examine his case more fully. We will kill him on the way." That's Acts chapter 23, verses 12 through 15. Yikes. That is some intense action and suspense movie-like stuff right there. But it's not pretend or make-believe. This stuff really happened. Even though the group of Jews planned to ambush and kill Paul, remember, that was not part of God's plan for Paul's life. But how did God use Paul's nephew to help Paul? Well, check it out. But Paul's nephew, his sister's son, heard of their plan and went to the fortress and told Paul. Paul called for one of the Roman officers and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something important to tell him." So the officer did, explaining, "Paul the prisoner called me over and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." And that's Acts 23, verses 16 through 18. So Paul's nephew told the Roman commander what he had heard. To protect Paul, the commander secretly sent Paul with a bunch of soldiers to protect him as he traveled to the governor to stand trial. Paul was saved! What Paul's nephew did was not an easy thing. These men who wanted to kill Paul were serious. And can you imagine what they would have done to Paul's nephew if they had found out what he was doing? Even though Paul went through many hard things in his life, including what we're learning about today, that never stopped him from teaching about Jesus in city after city after city. Paul kept choosing to be strong and courageous. Even his nephew chose to be strong and courageous. He was used by God to save Paul from being killed. We can be used in powerful ways by God too, if we choose to obey what our memory verse says. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. That's Deuteronomy 31:6. God will never leave his children. He will never forget about them. And God can use us to help others. God's power makes it possible for us to do whatever he has planned. If you're willing to be courageous enough to listen to and obey God, then when those close calls come and God gives you an opportunity to help others, you will be ready to go. I have no idea what God has planned for each of us, but I trust that his plan is best. And I know that the best choice is to follow and obey him. God can use us to help others. He might have us give to people in need or say a kind word to someone who is discouraged. God might use us to stand up for someone else who is being bullied, or even give us an opportunity to do the right thing when others around us are not. People can see us making the right choice, and that could encourage them to make good choices as well. Oh, and he definitely wants his children to go and tell others about his love and forgiveness. The fact is, there is no way I can give you a complete list, because only God knows his full and perfect plan for each of our lives. But keep your eyes and ears open. Pray to God and read his word, the Bible. You never know when God might have a special job just for you. God can use us to help others, just as he did with Paul's nephew. All right, guys, I'll see you next time.